Yeah, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency technologies. This is a book that goes with Coursera course. It's a free online course that you can take. There's a lot of excitement about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Optimists claim that Bitcoin will fundamentally alter payments, economic, and even political politics around the world. Pessimists claim Bitcoin is inherently broken and will suffer the inevitable and spectacular collapse. Underlying these different views is significant confusion about what Bitcoin is and how it works. We wrote this book to help cut through the hype and to get to the core of what makes Bitcoin unique. To really understand what is special about Bitcoin, we need to understand how it works at a technical level. Bitcoin truly is a new technology, and we can only get so far by explaining it through simple analogies to past technologies. We'll assume that you have a basic understanding of computer science, how computers work, data structures, algorithms, some programming experience. If you are an undergraduate or a graduate student of computer science or a software developer, an entrepreneur, or a technology hobbyist, this textbook is for you. In this book, we'll address the important question about Bitcoin. How does Bitcoin work? What makes it different? How secure are your Bitcoin? How anonymous are Bitcoin users? What applications can we build using Bitcoin as a platform? Can cryptocurrencies be regulated? If we were designing a new cryptocurrency today, what would we change? What might the future hold? Each chapter has a series of homework questions to help you understand these questions at a deeper level. In addition, there is a series of programming assignments in which you'll implement various component Bitcoin in simplified models. If you are an auditory learner, most of the material in this book is available as a series of video lectures. You can find these on Coursera course. You should also supplement your work with information you can find online, including the Bitcoin Wiki, forums, research papers, and by interacting with your peers in the Bitcoin community. After reading this book, you'll know everything you need to be able to separate fact from fiction when reading claims about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. You'll have the conceptual foundations you need to engineer structure software and interact with the Bitcoin network. And you'll be able to integrate ideas from Bitcoin into your own projects. A note of thanks. We're immensely grateful to the students who helped develop the programming assignments and to everyone who provided feedback to the draft of this book. Princeton students, and there's lists a whole bunch of students. Okay. Preface. The long road to Bitcoin. The path to Bitcoin is littered with corpses of failed attempts. I've compiled a list of hundreds of cryptographic payment systems, both e-cash and credit card-based technologies that are notable in some ways. Some are academic proposals that have been cited, while others are actual systems that were deployed and tested. Of all the names on the list, there's probably only one that you recognize, PayPal. And PayPal survived only because it quickly pivoted away from its original idea of a cryptographic payment and on handheld devices. It was going to be part of BlackBerry payment on Blackberries. There's a lot to learn from the history. Where do the ideas of Bitcoin come from? Why do some technologies survive while others die? What does it take for complex technical innovations to be successful, commercialized? If nothing else, the story will give you an appreciation of how remarkable it is when we finally have a real working payment mechanism that's native to the internet. And these are a bunch of them. Traditional financial arrangements. Back in the time before there were governments, before there was currency, one system that worked for acquiring goods was barter. Let's say Alice wants a tool and Bob wants medicine. If each of them happens to have what the other person needs, they could swap them safely to satisfy their needs. On the other hand, let's say Alice has food and she's willing to trade for a tool, while Bob has a tool, doesn't have any need of food. He wants medicine instead. Alice and Bob can't trade with each other. But if there is a third person, Carol, who has medicine and she's willing to trade for food, then it becomes possible to arrange a three-way swap where someone gets what they want, where everyone gets what they want. The drawback, of course, is coordination, arranging a group of people whose needs and wants align, and the same place at the same time. Two systems emerge to solve coordination: credit and cash. Historians, anthropologists, and economic debate which of the two developed first, but what's immaterial for their purposes. In the credit-based system, in the example above, Alice and Bob would be able to trade with each other. Bob would give Alice the tools, and Bob gets the favor that owed to him. In other words, Alice has a debt, and she needs to settle with Bob sometime in the future. Alice's material needs are now satisfied, but she has a debt that she'd like to cancel. So that's her new want. If Alice encounters Carol in the future, Alice can trade her food for medicine, then go back to Bob with medicine and cancel the debt. On the other hand, in a cash-based system, Alice would buy the tool from Bob. Later she might sell her food to Carol, and Carol can sell her medicine to Bob, completing the cycle. These traders can happen in any order, provided the buyer in each transaction has cash on hand. In the end, of course, it's as if no money had ever changed hands. Neither system is a clear superior. A cash-based system needs to be bootstrapped with some initial allocation of cash, without which no trades can occur. A credit-based system doesn't need bootstrapping, but the drawback is that anyone who owed a debt for taking on everyone who's owed a debt for taking on a risk. There's a chance that the other person never comes back and settles that debt. Cash also allows us to be precise about how much something is worth. If you're bartering, it's hard to say if a tool is worth more than medicine, or medicine is worth more than food. Cash lets us use a number to take this value, to talk about value. That's why we use a blended system today. Even when we're using credit, we measure debt in the amount of cash it would take to settle it. These ideas come up in many contexts, especially online systems where users trade virtual goods for some kind. For example, peer-to-peer file sharing networks must deal with problems of freeloaders, and that is users who download files without sharing in turn. While swapping files might work, there's also the issue of coordination, finding the perfect person who has exactly the file you want and want exactly the file you have. A project like Mojo Nation and the academic proposals like Karma, users get some initial allocation of virtual cash that they must spend to receive a file and earn when they send a copy of a file to another user. In both cases, one or more central servers help keep track of the user's balances, and may offer the exchange services between their internal currency and traditional currency. While Mojo Nation did not survive long enough to implement such an exchange, it became the intellectual ancestor of protocols used today like BitTorrent in Tahoe, LAFS. Trouble with credit cards online. Credit and cash are fundamental ideas, to the point that we can sort the multiple electronic payment methods into two piles. Bitcoin is obviously in the cash pile, but let's look at the other one first. Credit card transactions are the dominant payment method that is used on the web today. If you've ever bought something from an online seller such as Amazon, you know how the arrangement goes. You type in your credit card details, you send it to Amazon, and Amazon turns around with these credit card details and they talk to the system, financial system involving processors, banks, credit card companies, and other intermediaries. On the other hand, if you are using something like PayPal, what you see is an intermediary architecture. That's a company that sits between you and the seller. So you send the credit card details to the intermediary, which processes the transactions and notifies the seller, then settles its balance with the seller at the end of each day. What you gain from the architecture is that you don't have to give the seller your credit card details, which can be a security risk. You might not even have to give the seller your identity, which would improve your privacy as well. The downside is that you lose the simplicity of the interaction directly with the seller. Both you and the seller might have an account with the same intermediary. Today, most of us are comfortable with giving out our credit card information while shopping online, or at least we've grudgingly accepted it. We're also used to companies collecting the data about our online shopping browsing activity, but in the 1990s the web was new. Standards, protocols, and encryptions were emerging. These concerns made consumers deeply uncertain and hesitant. In particular, it was considered crazy to hand your credit card details to online vendors of unknown repute over an insecure channel. In such an environment, there was lots of interest in an intermediary architecture. A company called First Virtual was an early payment intermediary founded in 1994. Incidentally, they were one of the first companies to set up a purely virtual office with employees spread across the country and communicate over the internet, hence the name. First Virtual proposed a system were very much like PayPal's current system, but preceded it in many years. As a user enrolled with them and provided your credit card details, then if you wanted to buy something from a seller, the seller would contact First Virtual with the details of the requested payment. First would confirm these details with you, and if you approve, their credit card gets billed. But two details were interesting. First, all the communication happened over email. Web browsers back then were just beginning used at universities to support encryption protocols like HTTPS and multi-party nature payments protocol added other complexities. Other intermediaries took the approach of encoding information into URLs or using a custom encryption protocol on top of HTTP. Second, the consumer would have 90 days to dispute the charge, and the merchant would receive the money only after 3 months. Today, merchants does get paid immediately, but there's still risk that the consumer will file a chargeback or dispute the credit card statement. If that happens, the merchant will have to return the payment to the credit card company. In the mid-1990s, there was no competing approach to intermediary architectures, which we'll call the set architecture. Set also avoids the need for customers to send cash cards information to merchants. In addition, it avoids users enrolling with intermediary. In set, when you are ready to make a purchase, your browser passes your view of the transaction details to the shopping application on the computer, which to together with your credit card detail encrypts it in such a way that there is only the intermediary can decrypt it, and no one else can, including the seller. Having encrypted your data in this way, you can now send it to the seller knowing that it's secure. The seller blindly forwards encrypted data to the intermediary along with their own view of the transaction details. The intermediary decrypts your data and approves the transaction only if your view matches the seller's view. SET was a standard developed by Visa and credit card together with many technology heavyweights of the day: Netscape, IBM, Microsoft, VeriSign, and RSA. It was an umbrella specification that unified several existing proposals. One company that implemented SET was called CyberCash. It was an interesting company in many ways. In addition to the credit card payment processing, they had a digital cash product called the CyberCoin. This was a micropayment system intended for small payments, such as paying a few cents to read an online newspaper article. That meant you could probably never have more than $10 in CyberCoin account at a time. Yet amusingly, they were able to get U.S. government FTC insurance for each account for up to $100,000. Well, there's more. Back when CyberCash operated, there was a misguided and now abandoned U.S. government restriction on the export of cryptography, which was considered a weapon. That meant software that incorporated meaningful encryption couldn't be offered or downloaded to users in other countries. However, CyberCash was able to get a special exemption for their software from the Department of State. The government argued that the extraction of encryption technology out of CyberCash software would be harder than writing crypto from scratch. Finally, CryptoCash has a dubious distinction of being one of the only companies ever affected by the Y2K bug. It caused their payment processing software to double bill some users. They later went bankrupt in 2001. Their intellectual property was acquired by VeriSign, who has turned around and sold it to PayPal, where it lives today. Oh wow. Why didn't SET work? Well, the fundamental problem has to do with certificates. Certificates is a way to securely associate cryptographic identities. That is a public key with a real life identity. So we still have that problem, a public key with a real life identity. It's what a website needs to obtain from companies like VeriSign that are called certificate authorities. In order to show up as a secure in your browser, typically indicates by a locked icon. Putting security before usability, CyberCash and SET decided that not only would processors and merchants in their system have to get certificates, all users would have to get one as well. Getting a certificate is about as pleasant as doing your taxes, so the system was a disaster. Over the decade, mainstream users have said a firm and collective no to any system that requires end user certificates, and such proposals have been regulated and reallocated in academic papers. Bitcoin defiantly sidesteps this hairy problem by avoiding real-life identities altogether. In Bitcoin, a public key themselves are the identities by which users are known, as we'll see in Chapter 1. In the mid-1990s, when SET was being standardized, the World Wide Web Consortium was also looking to standardize financial payments. They wanted to do it by extending HTTP protocol instead. So the users wouldn't have to extra software for transactions. They could just use their browsers. In fact, they had a very general proposal on how you might extend the protocol, and one of the user case that they have was doing payments. This never happened. The whole extension framework was never deployed in any browser. In 2015, almost 2 decades later, the W3C has announced it wanted to take another crack at it, and that Bitcoin would be part of the standardized in this time around. Given all the past failures, however, I'm not holding my breath.